Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel called Living in Hayward, Wisconsin, where we talk about all things real estate related and also just about living in Hayward. I'm Audrey Miller. I'm the broker owner of Northwest Wisconsin Realty Team, and thank you so much for joining me today. There's been a lot of, I will call it clickbait out there on the internet, on YouTube, all over the media about the housing market and whether it's going to crash in 2025 or in some soon to be date, whether 2025 or shortly after. If you Google that, you'll find tons of articles, videos, information. So I wanted to just come here and try to provide a balanced perspective on this. I do think that a lot of the information that's out there is to get people to click on the video or the article. And when you actually dig into the details of it, the changes that are happening are very slight and not necessarily indicative of a crash happening anytime soon. But I'm just going to present this information to you in the form of different charts and graphs and pieces of information that I have. And you can see for yourself what you think about the real estate market in 2025. And then I'm also going to provide a short first quarter update and give you some information on year over year in our specific area here in Northwest Wisconsin, Sawyer and Washburn counties specifically, which is the areas that I work in, because we are not necessarily the same as the national market either. So, and I assume if you're listening to my channel, you're looking specifically in this area to buy or sell. So that might be of even more interest to you to get into those specifics within the area that I cover in and around Hayward and 45 minutes in any direction from that. So stay tuned, and hopefully this will help you, whether you're a buyer or seller, to strategize on your plan for 2025 when it comes to real estate. As always, before I forget to mention, feel free to like, subscribe, follow my channel, share it with others who might be interested, and feel free to reach out to me anytime via email, text, phone call if you have interest in buying or selling or just want to know what your place might be worth. Any of that, I'm happy to help. I'm located right on Main Street in Hayward, but I'm typically only in the office about one day a week, and I'm out and about meeting with buyers and sellers the rest of the time. So I do not pretend to be an expert on any of this or an economist or have the overall, I guess you would say, qualifications to be an expert. But what I do have is a unique perspective to offer to you, which is that I live and work in this area. And as a full-time real estate agent, I talk to buyers and sellers every day. So I get a very boots on the ground information from those people that I speak with every day. And sometimes that actually can tell you just as much or more than a global perspective or just looking at data. So it's a mix of things, but I think that that boots on the ground perspective can be helpful when you're trying to figure out, what is going to happen. And honestly, probably for every person out there, there is a different opinion. So I'm going to give you a bunch of information. You can draw your own conclusions, and then I'll kind of insert my opinion here and there for whatever it might be worth or not. So the first thing that we're going to look at here, because I think this is important in the overall scheme of things, is how many people have bought properties with cash in terms of the homeowners in the country. This is on a global scale, and this comes from the chief economist with the NAR, which is, I believe his name is Lawrence Yun. So this is information that he put together from data nationally. So of all of the 88 million homeowners in the country, believe it or not, 35.2% have no mortgage at all. So we've seen this a lot in the past number of years when the market was so hot and competitive. To get a property, a lot of people had to offer cash, whether that came out of their IRAs, retirement accounts, if they just had cash sitting in a checking account. So there are lots and lots of people who have no mortgage at all, over a third of homeowners, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. But I think this plays into the overall picture of things that we have right now, because there's lots of people who don't even have a mortgage. So you'll hear this information out there like, oh gosh, there's going to be foreclosures and the market is going to crash and all of this, when 1/3 of the homeowners don't even have a mortgage to begin with. The next category is 11.6% of people who have 3% or less interest rate. So they're locked in at under 3%. That's 11.6% of the homeowners. Then there's 18.5% that are between 3 and 4% interest, 8.4% that are between 4 and 5 interest rate. And then the rest of the categories, as you can see here, the 5.3 and the 9% are probably people who purchased in the last couple of years after the interest rates went up. And why this is important is one of the dynamics that we have going on right now in our market is that people have been hanging on to their houses because they are locked in, say at 4 or 5 5% or even lower. So part of the dynamic that this has created is a low level of inventory, as people don't want to trade a 2 or 3% interest rate for a 6 or 7% interest rate. So I think that's an interesting chart to look at in the overall scheme of things. And then next we have mortgages that are in a serious delinquent challenge. So take a look at this graph. This goes the whole way back to the year of 2000. And when you read and hear these things, foreclosure rates are rising. Sometimes when you dig into these articles, you'll find that it's risen by 1% or 2%. So again, it's a headline, but the meat of the article, when you dig into it, is really not any significant change. Because when you look at this graph, we have ticked up a little bit since 2023, but we're really very similar to pre-pandemic levels. So 2019, maybe early 2020, obviously the big jump you see here in 2021, 2022 was because of all the job loss and the mayhem that ensued with the COVID-19 pandemic. But when you look at this chart, you can see that we're at similar levels to the whole way from 2000 to 2006. And then the big, almost a depression or crash that happened in 2008, obviously then spiked the foreclosure rates very high. So a lot of people are saying things like, we're going to have another crash like 2008. But that first chart I showed you, to me, indicates that's not going to happen. And this next chart is going to show you even more. So this is household equity in real estate. So because the prices have risen so dramatically in the last number of years, all across the country, in our area as well, there's lots of homeowners with a high level of equity in their homes. So they can borrow against that equity. They can choose to sell if they need to, and they've got a large amount of cash that they can use to move on. So check this out. Of course, it has been inclining since 2012, because after the crash, prices went way down for 2009, 10, 11, and ever since 2012, we've been climbing. Then you see the huge boost in prices that happened in 2021, 2022 at the peak of the market, but we're actually still above there. Prices have continued to incline even after the peak of the frenzy, I will say, in 2022, when the interest rates went a little higher, the buyer pool got a little smaller. So there's still more equity in people's homes right now than there has been at any time in this whole chart, which goes back almost 25 years. So it's very hard to believe that there would be any kind of significant crash when homeowners have this much equity in their homes. In fact, prices have continued to rise very slowly. We've been in a generally steady market as far as prices for about 2 years now. Not much up or down. In fact, I just pulled the statistics from April 1st to April 1st of last year. So April 1st of 2025 to April 1st of 2024. And it was $404,000 for average sale price, compared to the year before, which would have been spring of 2024 to spring of 2023, was $402,000 for an entire year's data. So essentially, we have been flat on price with no change really one way or the other for a good 2 years now. So this next piece of information is just a nationwide forecast, again, provided by the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors. And this is just the prediction for 2025 and 2026. Now, this is just a guess. It's a prediction, but might be worth taking a minute to look at what is predicted to happen within the general, existing home sales, new home sales prices. They're predicting pretty flat prices, not really up or down. They're predicting pretty flat interest rates from where we have been, which has been upwards of 7 back down to in that 6 to 6.5, more like 6.5 right now. I agree. I don't think they're going to really drop the interest rates. And here's the thing. If they do, this is going to actually make it more difficult for buyers, in my opinion, because what we've had happen over the last couple of years with the higher interest rates is that the buyer pool has gotten smaller. So some people, due to the higher interest rates, are not able to afford the house that they would like to buy. Maybe they want to upsize, especially if they're in that state, or they're first-time home buyers, and they've kind of gotten priced out of the market, which is really unfortunate. And it's a struggle for people to find affordable housing, because as home prices went up, rents also went up. You're either buying a house for yourself or you're renting, so those prices tend to stay similar. Landlords can get more when house prices are higher. So what we've seen is the buyer pool has shrunk, but there still is such an inventory shortage that there's more buyers than sellers, generally speaking. So it has remained what I will call a seller's market. But if interest rates were to drop, there actually would be a new flood of buyers to the market. So if you're sitting there thinking like, I don't want to buy right now because I think their prices are going to come down, or I want to wait for interest rates to come down, you could potentially be in a worse position if interest rates were to drop due to the competitive nature of things. Now, obviously, you can't buy a house if it's unaffordable to you. I would never suggest that, stretch yourself to the point that you don't have your living expenses, etc. But if you can afford it, I think that buying now could be less competitive than if interest rates were to fall. I don't really believe they're going to, but again, it's anyone's guess, right? And then let's just take a look at the inventory, because this is a big factor as well. I like to say, as long as inventory remains low, prices are going to stay high. It's a simple supply and demand thing to me. Like I said, I'm no economist, but when you have more demand than supply, prices stay high. Maybe you think, oh, this house is overpriced, but if someone else is willing to pay that price, or if there's 5 other people willing to pay that price, then the prices will stay up. So there's this whole group of buyers that's kind of waiting for prices to come back down to what they believe is reasonable amount for a house. And honestly, I think it's kind of like living in the good old days to expect that. If we do see a slight dip, I think it's going to be based on inventory levels increasing, because people who have been hanging on and not selling due to the interest rate switch might now, they just need to. It's time. They have other factors in their lives that are causing them to sell. So as inventory levels rise, I think we could see prices come down a little bit as the buyer and seller pool even out a little bit more. And I think that's actually a good thing for our market overall. I understand sellers have to take a little bit less in that case, but it would also bring more buyers back into the market. So I don't necessarily view that as a bad thing. But to me, supply and demand is the biggest factor that we're dealing with. And it's kind of simple for any industry. If you have more demand than supply, prices stay higher. If you have more supply than demand, they're going to come down a little bit. So I think this inventory metric is one to really pay attention to. And as you can see from this graph, it really is just rising slightly, but it is rising a little bit, which is good, I feel. But if you look back to the 2006, 7, 8, when we had huge amounts of inventory, that is when prices started to decline. That's around the time that the big crash happened. And then we came down on inventory, reached some very low levels of inventory and dips. I think those are seasonal dips, like summer versus winter, that you see from year to year. But here we are in 2025, still with a very low inventory compared to what they consider to be a balanced market, which is about 4 to 6 months of supply. We instead, I think, have not even 3 months of supply currently. And then let's look a little bit at Wisconsin. This is not the Hayward area specifically, but just in Wisconsin. I think these graphs are worth taking a look at, and these are put out by the Wisconsin Realtors Association. This is just for January and February of 2025 versus January and February of 2024, because they don't get their March data released until sometime in April, and I'm recording this at the beginning of April. So you can see year over year mortgage interest rates, they have gone up slightly, but that actually came down a little bit in March, so that number would likely be slightly lower now than it was at the end of February or early March when they did this report. Year-to-date home sales have increased a tiny bit, which is good, because 2023 and 2024 have been the lowest national amount of home sales since the mid-90s. So we have been at a very low level of actual sales. Again, I believe in part due to some people not being able to afford to buy, and secondly, people hanging on to their houses because they didn't want to get rid of their smaller interest rate. So I think we're going to see cracks in both of those things in terms of more properties coming on the market. I know I've had a lot of listing inquiries and activities and upcoming listings. We're still in winter time right now. Spring is having a hard time getting its feet on the ground. We just got snow again the other day. So you're going to see quite a few properties coming on the market in the next month to 2 months in the Hayward area is my opinion. And that always happens, but I think this spring there might be more than normal, which is good for you as a buyer if you're a buyer. So average days on market statewide is almost exactly the same. And you can take a look at these others: housing affordability, months of inventory by classification. Obviously we are in a rural area here, so months of inventory has increased just a little bit. And then this next chart talks about the monthly home sales just for February, year over year, total statewide listings, median home prices, and all of that. But I'll delve into our specific area a little bit more on some of those metrics. So if you look at the entire MLS right now, and I did this for all of Sawyer and Washburn County, so this is in the area that I cover, the amount of listings that are available right now is so low. Let's say you're looking for a $500,000 to $750,000 home on water right now, as of today. There are literally 6 listings in all of Sawyer and Washburn County. One is kind of a unique resort property that would not appeal to the majority of buyers, and one is a former golf course main lodge that's got some rental units in the bottom. That's on water. So again, not what is going to appeal to the typical buyer. So there's 4 properties to choose from right now in that price range in the entire area. Let's say you're looking for an off-water residential property that is between $200,000 and $350,000. Seems like a good starter budget these days, right? There are only 16 properties to choose from, and that covers, this is in a wide area, all of Washburn and Sawyer County. So let's say you're looking around Hayward, you might have only 6 or 8 properties to choose from, some in town, some out of town. You're looking down in Winter, you might have 2 or 3 properties to choose from. So there is just such limited properties to choose from. What I'm hearing from buyers a lot is there's just nothing out there. There's nothing out there. Well, there are properties available, but when you plug in a specific buyer's criteria, do they want to be on a little bit of acreage? Do they want to be closer to Hayward? Do they want to be closer to Spooner or wherever? When you plug all of that in, the choices are really, really limited. So in total right now on the market, there are 177 listings, residential. This is residential in all of Sawyer and Washburn County. And of those, there are 137 that are available and 37 that are under contract. So again, slim pickings. That's why I think a lot of buyers are waiting for the spring market to bring more listings to the marketplace so they have something to choose from. So what does all this mean for buyers and sellers? You know, I've shown you a lot of information, giving you a lot of information, giving you a few of my thoughts. I think that sellers, this is my advice to sellers in the market that we are in right now, you have to consider that we are past the peak of the frenzy of the market, which was in June before the interest rates rose, in June of 2022, before the interest rates rose that late summer and fall. So when you're receiving comps from your agent and they're showing you kind of what things have sold for, you do need to factor in that you have to be reasonable with your price. Not too low, but not too high. I have sellers say to me, like, I'm just going to price it high. I don't really need to sell. I'm going to wait for that one buyer. And I can tell you that probably 90% of the time that one buyer doesn't come around, because people can look. They have educated agents that are working with them. Buyers themselves are educated. They know what things sell for. So overpricing is a poor strategy no matter what, but especially in this market. It's so important to hire an experienced agent who knows the market, knows the nuances of the market, knows how to do accurate comps, and then you hopefully can follow their advice and price it appropriately. We are still in a seller's market. So if you ended up pricing a little bit on the low side inadvertently, it will go higher. I just saw this happen last week. You know, it's springtime. There's not many listings. Buyer activity has been slow, yet there was a property that came on the market. It was priced appropriately, probably a little bit on the low side. Within 3 days, they had multiple offers and more coming in. So it is still fast moving. You have to make a decision fairly quickly. If you are on the buyer side, and on the seller side, just be reasonable. Maybe you take the comps and you go under the comps by 2 to 5%, or you go right at the middle of the comps instead of on the higher range, because the market is strong enough that you will be able to sell versus it's sitting on the market. So I just think that's one of my biggest pieces of advice. Don't look at your neighbor's house that sold in 2021 and say, oh, they got this much for it. You have to understand the market conditions we are in. While still a seller's market, buyers are gaining a little more leverage due to the smaller buyer pool. There's not as much competition, but on the buyer side, you still can't just sit and wait. A lot of buyers, if they are thinking like, oh, I have all the time in the world to make a decision, next thing they know, someone else has bought the property. So our days on market have increased. So as a buyer, you have a little more ability to wait a week to see a property, maybe, or wait a few days to make a decision. You don't have unlimited amounts of time. Someone else will purchase the property. Our days on market have increased only about 25 days year over year, and you still need to make a pretty quick decision if you do like a property. I have seen more home inspections come back into play. I've seen more home sale contingencies come back into play as it has become less competitive. Those buyers were completely shut out for years, not even able to get a property. Now, good news for buyers, you're able to add back in some of those important contingencies and still be able to find a property as the buyer pool has gotten a little smaller, with interest rates staying up and inventory still being low, however, continues to make it a seller's market. So hopefully that all makes sense. And then I know this has gotten really long and probably most of you haven't even made it to this point of the video, but I wanted to just give a quick snapshot of the first quarter of 2024 versus 2025. So let's take a look first at the statistics from 2024, and especially if you look to the part right above where it says presented by Audrey Miller. The average is what we're looking at. So the average home sale price is $318,300, and the average days on market was 103, and this was in 2024 first quarter. So 80 total listings sold in that time frame. And now let's take a look at this chart for 2025 and look at the same metrics. We have 379,000 for the sale price. However, because this is such a small amount of listings, this is skewed by a $2+ million sale that happened in the first quarter of 2025, and we didn't have a sale like that in 2024. So 72 listings sold in 2025 versus 2024 was 80. So that's down a little bit. But I think when we look at the year as a whole, we're going to see that metric has risen a little because that's what's happening nationwide. So I kind of expect that here. But the days on market is probably the most interesting thing on here because you can see that increased by 24 days. And I'm seeing that as I'm out in the field working with buyers and sellers. It used to be if you didn't have an offer in the first 3 to 5 days, like, oh my gosh, we're priced too high. Then it became, well, if you don't have an offer in the first 2 weeks. Now I would say it's more like the first 30 days or maybe even a little bit more there that you have to start looking at, like, okay, are we priced appropriately for this market if your place hasn't sold in that 30 to 40 day time frame? I think that's a good indicator. So it's very important as an agent to know these facts, know this data, so that you can say, okay, here's how I can guide a seller. Here's how I can guide a buyer on how quickly they need to move. Here's how I can talk to a seller about pricing and if any price reductions need to happen and all of that. So still a very robust market. I expect that to continue into 2025. Obviously, there's world events going on that may or may not impact real estate market. But when you look at all this data, I'm curious what all of you think about what you predict will happen in the market in 2025. I am expecting another good year. I'm expecting it to remain a seller's market, but with buyers having a little bit more leverage. And I expect that inventory will rise a little. And I expect that home sales will stay similar in price to what they have been, not much up or down, but that towards the end of the year, if inventory increases, and this is staying static with interest rates, I think we may see slight drops. If the buyer pool stays smaller but inventory rises, we may see slight declines in pricing throughout 2025 or maybe going into 2026. So I can watch this in 10 months and see if I was anywhere close to right or if I'm completely wrong. But again, hope this information was helpful. If you're looking to buy or sell, please reach out to me. If you want to pick my brain, I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you have any thoughts on this or pieces of information that maybe I missed or overlooked that you feel are critical to the discussion. But yeah, get out there, go look at what's available, and hopefully you can find the house that you're looking for this year or sell the house that you need to sell to move on to the next chapter of your life. And I'm happy to help with either.